He used to laugh at her job in front of everyone. For years later, he would walk into a boardroom and realize she owned the company. On a cool October evening in downtown Chicago, the ballroom of the Lakeshore Grand Hotel glowed with warm amber lights and the quiet confidence of corporate success. Crystal glasses chimed softly as executives and managers from Aurora Dynamics gathered for their annual networking gala, dressed in tailored suits and polished smiles. At one of the tall cocktail tables near the window stood Sophia Bennett, her navy dress simple, her posture calm, her hands gently wrapped around a glass of sparkling water. Outside, Lake Michigan stretched into the darkness like a sheet of black glass, but inside the room the energy was louder, brighter, full of ambition. Sophia worked in customer support at Aurora Dynamics, a role most people in the room barely noticed, answering calls, solving small problems, guiding frustrated clients through systems they barely understood. It wasn't glamorous, but she did it well. Across the room, Ryan Walker laughed loudly with a group of colleagues. Ryan was a mid-level operations manager with sharp suits and an easy confidence that made people listen when he spoke. He was also Sophia's husband. When one of the managers jokingly asked Ryan how his evening was going, Ryan raised his glass and grinned. "Better now that the small talk is over," he said. "My wife here spends all day answering phones. After hearing customer complaints for 8 hours straight, I'm pretty sure she deserves a medal just for surviving." The group chuckled politely. Someone added, "Customer support must take patience." Ryan shrugged with a smirk. "Patience, sure. But let's be honest. It's not exactly a real career." The laughter that followed was light, casual, the kind that disappears quickly into the music and conversation of a crowded room. But Sophia heard every word. She kept her expression steady, her eyes soft, as if the comment had drifted past her like background noise. Her fingers tightened slightly around the cold glass, but her voice remained calm when she spoke. "Excuse me," she said quietly, stepping away from the table. No one stopped her. No one noticed how carefully she walked across the ballroom floor, past tables covered in white linen, past clusters of employees discussing quarterly numbers and market strategy. To most of them, she was simply another support staff member moving through the event. Ryan didn't follow her. A few minutes later, he leaned closer to his coworkers and said in a lower voice, "Look, Sophia's nice, but we both know we're on different levels professionally." Someone nodded. Another sip of whiskey. Another round of polite laughter. Outside, the cool Chicago wind brushed against the tall hotel windows while Sophia stood quietly on the terrace overlooking the lake. She watched the city lights shimmer across the water and took a slow breath. The music inside continued, muffled by glass and distance. In that quiet moment, something inside her settled. Not anger, not humiliation, but a calm realization she couldn't ignore anymore. 3 months later, their marriage would end. Ryan Walker would walk away believing he had simply outgrown someone who worked a small job answering phones. What he didn't know was that the woman he dismissed that night would spend the next 4 years quietly transforming her life. And one day, he would walk into a company office expecting another ordinary job interview, only to discover that Sophia Bennett was no longer the woman he remembered. She was the owner of the company. 3 months after that night at the Lakeshore Grand Hotel, the silence between Sophia Bennett and Ryan Walker had grown heavier than any argument. Their apartment in downtown Chicago still looked the same gray couch by the window, the same framed photos from vacations along the California coast, but the atmosphere had shifted into something colder and distant. Ryan spent longer hours at work, coming home late with the smell of city rain and office coffee still clinging to his suit. Sophia stopped asking when he would be back. One quiet Sunday morning, sunlight slipped through the kitchen blinds and stretched across the hardwood floor while Sophia folded the last of her clothes into a small navy suitcase. Ryan stood by the doorway watching with the expression of someone who had already made peace with a decision long before it was spoken out loud. Neither of them raised their voices. The conversation was calm, almost strangely polite, like two colleagues ending a business partnership rather than a marriage. Ryan explained that their lives were moving in different directions, that he needed someone who understood his ambitions, someone who could keep up with the professional world he was building. Sophia listened without interrupting. She had heard those words before, hidden inside jokes and passing comments, each one small but sharp enough to leave a mark. When she closed the suitcase, The sound of the zipper sliding into place felt final. She left the apartment that afternoon carrying one suitcase and a quiet determination that even she did not fully understand yet. Life afterward was not dramatic or glamorous. Sophia kept her job in customer support at Aurora Dynamics, arriving every morning a little before 8 with a cup of black coffee and a notebook filled with observations about the problems customers reported. She listened carefully during every phone call, not just to the frustration in people's voices, but to the patterns behind their complaints. Over time she began to notice something others had overlooked. The same technical issue appeared again and again, buried inside hundreds of support tickets. Most employees treated those calls as routine problems to solve quickly before moving on to the next customer. Sophia treated them like clues. Late in the evenings after her shift ended, she stayed at her small apartment kitchen table with a laptop open, reading product manuals, watching online lectures about data analysis, and teaching herself how the company's software actually worked behind the scenes. The city outside her window moved through its usual rhythm of passing taxis, distant train horns, and streetlights glowing against the Chicago skyline while Sophia studied quietly for hours. Weeks turned into months. Her supervisors began to notice that the reports she submitted were unusually detailed. Instead of simple summaries, she included charts showing trends in customer complaints and suggestions for improving certain features of the product. One afternoon a senior manager paused by her desk and asked where she had learned to analyze support data like that. Sophia simply smiled and said she had been paying attention. The truth was simpler than ambition and stronger than pride. She was no longer trying to prove anything to Ryan Walker, or to the coworkers who had laughed that night at the gala. She was trying to understand the system around her, piece by piece, until the job everyone dismissed as answering phones became something else entirely. And quietly, almost invisibly, Sophia Bennett began to move beyond the role people thought she belonged in. The months that followed moved quietly but steadily, like the slow turning of gears inside a machine that most people never noticed. Each morning Sophia Bennett arrived at Aurora Dynamics before the office lights fully brightened, setting her coffee beside her keyboard while the city outside slowly woke up. Customer calls continued to come through her headset, voices from across the country asking for help with passwords, system errors and account access, the ordinary rhythm of support work that most employees considered routine. But Sophia listened differently now. Every complaint, every confusion, every repeated issue became another small piece of a much larger picture forming in her mind. She wrote everything down in a worn notebook beside her desk, drawing arrows between ideas, circling patterns that appeared again and again in the data. When her shift ended, most employees packed their bags and hurried toward the elevators, eager to escape the glow of computer screens after a long day. Sophia stayed. She opened spreadsheets filled with customer feedback and slowly transformed those scattered details into organized reports that explained exactly where the company's software design was failing its users. It was not glamorous work, and no one asked her to do it. But she continued anyway. Over time the reports became longer, clearer and more precise, showing not only the problems customers experienced, but also potential solutions that could improve the entire system. One late afternoon, as the Chicago skyline faded into soft orange light beyond the office windows, her supervisor paused beside her desk holding a printed copy of one of her reports. He flipped through the pages slowly, his expression shifting from curiosity to genuine surprise. He asked her how someone in customer support had learned to analyze product performance with that level of detail. Sophia simply explained that listening carefully had taught her more about the system than any manual ever could. Within weeks her reports began circulating beyond the support department. Product managers read them. Engineers referenced them during internal meetings. The quiet observations she had written during long evenings were suddenly influencing decisions about software updates and new features. For the first time since she had joined Aurora Dynamics, people across the company began to notice her name attached to the documents appearing in their inboxes. The recognition did not arrive with applause or announcements. It appeared in small ways, a manager asking for her opinion during a meeting, an engineer sending a message thanking her for identifying a recurring issue that had gone unnoticed. For months, Sophia accepted the attention calmly, the same way she had accepted the silence during the early days when no one had cared about the work she was doing. Outside the office, life remained simple. Her apartment overlooked a busy Chicago street where the hum of traffic continued long after midnight. Some evenings she studied new skills online, learning about product design and business strategy, while the glow of her laptop illuminated the small kitchen table. Other nights she simply watched the city lights and allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Ryan Walker had not crossed her mind for a long time. The life she was building no longer depended on proving him wrong or seeking approval from anyone who had once doubted her. Instead, Sophia Bennett focused on something far more powerful, understanding the system around her so deeply that one day she might help shape its future. And slowly, almost without anyone realizing it, the woman who had once answered phones all day was beginning to move closer to the center of decisions that would determine where Aurora Dynamics was heading next. Autumn slowly turned into winter in Chicago, and the wind that swept along the streets outside Aurora Dynamics carried the sharp chill of Lake Michigan. Inside the office building, however, something else was beginning to change. Sophia Bennett no longer spent her entire day answering customer calls. The reports she had quietly written during long evenings had reached people far above the support department, and one Monday morning she was invited to attend a product strategy meeting on the 20th floor. The invitation alone surprised her. Those meetings were usually reserved for managers and engineers who had been with the company for years. When Sophia stepped into the conference room that morning, a long glass wall revealed the gray skyline of downtown Chicago stretching for miles. Around the table sat department leaders discussing growth targets, software improvements, and the growing competition in the technology market. For a while she simply listened. Then one of the executives asked if anyone had insight into the customer frustration that had been appearing in recent feedback reports. A quiet pause settled over the room until the head of product glanced toward Sophia and nodded slightly. She explained the pattern she had been studying for months, how a small design flaw in the company's onboarding system caused confusion for thousands of users across the country. Instead of speaking quickly, she walked through the problem step by step, describing how customers experienced the issue and how a simple redesign could remove it entirely. The room grew unusually quiet while she spoke. By the time she finished, several engineers were already taking notes. Over the next few weeks, the development team tested the solution she had suggested. The change was small, but the results were immediate. Customer complaints about that issue dropped dramatically, and internal reports showed a measurable improvement in user satisfaction. For the first time since she joined Aurora Dynamics, Sophia Bennett was invited back into the strategy room, not as a guest, but as someone whose perspective mattered. Her title had not changed yet, but the way people looked at her had. Managers who once walked past the support desks without noticing now stopped to ask for her opinion about customer trends. Engineers occasionally brought technical questions to her desk, curious about the patterns she had been uncovering in the data. Through it all, Sophia remained calm and focused. She continued arriving early, continued studying business strategy at night, and continued building the quiet discipline that had carried her through the difficult months after her divorce. What she did not realize at the time was that Aurora Dynamics itself was beginning to face a turning point. The company had grown quickly during the past few years, but rapid growth also meant rising financial pressure. Competitors were expanding, investors were watching closely, and behind the scenes the leadership team was discussing difficult choices about the future of the business. In a boardroom several floors above where Sophia worked, conversations were already beginning about potential investment partners who might help stabilize the company during the next stage of growth. Sophia Bennett did not know about those discussions yet. She simply continued doing what she had always done since the day she left her old life behind, paying attention, learning the system around her, and quietly preparing for opportunities that most people never saw coming. Winter settled fully over Chicago, and the icy wind that swept between the skyscrapers made the city feel sharper, faster, more urgent. Inside Aurora Dynamics, the pace of work had intensified as well. The company was growing, but growth brought pressure, and pressure revealed weaknesses that could no longer be ignored. Meetings happened more frequently on the upper floors, and quiet conversations about finances and long-term strategy echoed through the executive hallways. Sophia Bennett noticed the shift even from her desk. Reports were requested faster, questions came more often, and the leadership team began searching carefully for solutions that could stabilize the company during its next stage of expansion. One afternoon, the head of product stopped by Sophia's desk again and asked if she had time to walk upstairs to review something. The request surprised her, but she followed him to a conference room where several managers were already gathered around a long glass table. Charts filled the screen at the front of the room, showing declining efficiency in certain departments and rising operational costs that had quietly grown during the company's rapid expansion. The conversation moved quickly between numbers and projections until someone asked the question that had been hovering over the entire meeting. How could Aurora Dynamics improve its systems without slowing down growth? The room fell silent for a moment before the head of product looked toward Sophia again. She had spent months studying how customers use the company's platform, and those patterns had shown her something others had missed. Instead of focusing only on the technical side of the product, she explained how the company's internal workflow was creating unnecessary delays that frustrated both customers and employees. Her explanation was calm and methodical, connecting small details she had observed over hundreds of customer interactions. The managers listened carefully as she outlined a series of adjustments that could streamline the entire support structure and reduce the strain on the engineering teams. By the time she finished, several executives exchanged thoughtful glances. The proposal was simple, but the potential impact was significant. Over the following months, the leadership team began quietly implementing the changes she had suggested. Gradually, the results appeared in the company's internal metrics. Customer satisfaction improved. Support wait times dropped. Engineers spent less time fixing repetitive issues and more time building new features. What surprised Sophia most was not the success of the changes, but the way the company leadership began involving her in more discussions. She was no longer just the employee who had noticed a pattern in customer complaints. She had become someone whose insight helped guide the direction of the product itself. At the same time, the financial pressure surrounding Aurora Dynamics continued to grow behind the scenes. Investors were watching closely, and the board of directors had started searching for new capital that could strengthen the company's position in an increasingly competitive market. Negotiations with potential investment partners began quietly, discussed only within small executive meetings far above the everyday workspaces. Sophia Bennett remained unaware of just how closely those conversations would soon connect with her own future. She continued studying late into the night, learning about business strategy and corporate finance, building knowledge piece by piece with the same patience that had guided her from the support desk to the strategy room. What she did not realize yet was that the company she had helped improve was approaching a moment when one bold decision could change everything. And when that moment arrived, the person most prepared to step forward would not be the executives who had spent years chasing growth. It would be the woman who had once listened quietly to customer calls and learned the entire system from the inside out. By early spring, the snow along the Chicago streets had begun to melt, leaving thin rivers of water running along the sidewalks as the city slowly shook off the long winter. Inside Aurora Dynamics, the atmosphere felt different as well, not louder but more focused, as if everyone sensed that the company was standing at an important crossroads. Over the past year, Sophia Bennett had become a quiet but familiar presence in rooms where she once would never have been invited. Her ideas had helped simplify internal systems, and the improvements continued to show in the company's performance reports. Yet despite the progress, Aurora Dynamics was still facing a financial challenge that could not be solved by efficiency alone. Rapid growth had created opportunity, but it had also created risk, and the board of directors knew that the next stage of expansion would require significant investment. One afternoon, Sophia was asked to join another meeting on the upper floor, this time with several executives she had only seen occasionally in the hallways. The room overlooked Lake Michigan, its wide windows filling the space with pale afternoon light. Charts and projections appeared across the screen at the front of the room, outlining the company's financial outlook for the coming years. The discussion moved carefully through revenue forecasts, operational costs, and the competitive landscape of the technology industry. As the conversation continued, it became clear that the company was exploring the possibility of bringing in a major outside investor. Such a partnership could provide the capital needed to expand their platform nationwide, but it also meant that new shareholders might gain influence over the company's direction. Sophia listened quietly, studying the numbers with the same attention she once gave to customer complaints on support calls. She noticed patterns that felt familiar, small signals hidden inside larger data sets. When one executive asked if anyone had thoughts about the long-term impact of outside investment, Sophia spoke carefully. She explained that Aurora Dynamics had built its strongest advantages by listening closely to customers and adapting quickly to their needs. If the company expanded too quickly under the pressure of new investors, that responsiveness might disappear. Her point was not to reject investment entirely, but to emphasize that the right partner would need to believe in the same long-term vision that had guided the company's success so far. The executives listened more seriously than she expected. After the meeting ended, one of the senior board members approached her privately and asked a simple question. If she believed in the company's future that strongly, would she ever consider becoming more involved in its ownership? The question lingered in Sophia's mind long after she returned to her desk. At first it seemed almost impossible. She had started at Aurora Dynamics answering customer calls and studying software manuals late at night. Ownership was something reserved for investors and founders, not for someone who had begun at the very edge of the company's structure. Yet the more she thought about it, the more she realized that her understanding of the business ran deeper than she had once believed. She knew how customers experienced the platform, how the internal systems functioned, and how the company could grow without losing the qualities that made it successful. Over the following weeks, Sophia began quietly researching the financial side of corporate ownership, learning how shares were structured, how investment groups formed partnerships, and how companies were sometimes reshaped by the decisions of a single determined stakeholder. The process was complex, but she approached it with the same patience that had guided every step of her journey so far. What she did not realize yet was that the knowledge she was gathering would soon place her in a position that very few people could have predicted. A position where the woman who once listened to customer calls might soon hold influence over the entire company itself. Spring arrived slowly in Chicago, bringing longer daylight and a warmer breeze that drifted between the glass towers downtown. From the windows of Aurora Dynamics, the lake reflected pale sunlight that stretched across the water like a sheet of silver. Inside the building, however, the atmosphere remained focused and serious as the leadership team continued searching for the right investment partner who could secure the company's future. For Sophia Bennett, the weeks after that boardroom conversation passed quietly but with a growing sense of purpose. Each evening after work, she returned to her apartment, placed her laptop on the small kitchen table, and studied the financial structures behind corporate ownership. Articles about venture capital, shareholder agreements, and private investment funds filled her browser tabs. At first the language felt unfamiliar, but Sophia approached it the same way she had approached customer data months earlier, breaking each concept into smaller pieces until the larger pattern became clear. She learned how companies sometimes raise capital by offering equity to outside investors, and how those investors could eventually gain control if they accumulated enough shares. She also learned something more subtle, that ownership was not always reserved for founders or billionaires. In certain moments of transition, a determined investor with the right understanding of the company could reshape its future entirely. During the day, she continued her work at Aurora Dynamics, attending product meetings and reviewing performance reports, but now she paid attention to a different layer of information. She listened when executives mentioned upcoming board discussions, when financial projections appeared on presentation slides, and when quiet conversations about potential buyers or investment groups drifted through the office corridors. It became clear that negotiations were already happening behind closed doors. Several outside firms were interested in acquiring a significant share of the company. The leadership team hoped such a deal would bring stability and allow Aurora Dynamics to expand nationwide. Yet Sophia could sense that the board members were cautious. The wrong partner might push the company toward rapid profits at the expense of the customer-focused culture that had allowed it to grow in the first place. One evening after a long day at the office, Sophia walked along the Chicago River, the city lights reflecting across the dark water while the elevated trains rumbled faintly in the distance. She thought about the question the board member had asked her weeks earlier, whether she would ever consider becoming involved in the ownership of the company. At the time it had sounded unrealistic. Now it felt like a possibility she could not ignore. Sophia had spent years understanding Aurora Dynamics from the inside out. She knew the product, the customers, and the internal systems better than many executives who had joined the company later. If someone unfamiliar with that culture gained control, everything she had helped build could change overnight. That thought stayed with her as she returned to her apartment and opened her laptop once again. Over the next several nights she reached out to financial advisors, investment consultants, and small venture groups who specialized in complex corporate transactions. The conversations were cautious at first, but as Sophia explained her understanding of the company and its potential, interest began to grow. What none of them knew was that the quiet woman asking questions about equity structures and acquisition strategies had once been the employee answering customer support calls on the lowest floor of Aurora Dynamics. And while negotiations for the company's future were quietly unfolding among executives and investors across the city, Sophia Bennett was preparing for a move that would place her directly at the center of those decisions. By early summer the air in Chicago felt warmer and brighter, and the city moved with a faster rhythm as sunlight stretched longer across the skyline. At Aurora Dynamics the quiet search for a major investment partner was reaching a critical stage. Several venture groups had already expressed interest in purchasing a significant share of the company, and the board of directors was carefully reviewing proposals that could reshape the future of the business. Inside the office the conversations were professional and controlled, but the tension was impossible to ignore. Employees sensed that something important was approaching, even if they did not know the details. Sophia Bennett continued to work as she always had, calm and focused, but behind the scenes her evenings had taken on a very different purpose. Over the past several weeks the discussions she had started with financial advisors and investment consultants had slowly turned into something real. What began as quiet questions about ownership structures had evolved into detailed conversations about assembling a strategic investment group. The advisors she contacted were initially cautious, but they quickly recognized that Sophia's understanding of Aurora Dynamics was unusually deep. She did not speak like an outsider hoping to profit from a technology trend. She spoke like someone who had studied the company from the inside for years and understood both its strengths and its vulnerabilities. Late one evening she sat in a small conference room at an investment firm overlooking the Chicago River. Through the glass wall the city lights reflected across the dark water, while financial documents and spreadsheets covered the table in front of her. The group of advisors listening to her proposal exchanged thoughtful glances as she described the opportunity. Aurora Dynamics was approaching a turning point. With the right leadership and patient investment, the company could expand across the country, while maintaining the customer-centered philosophy that had fueled its growth. But if control passed to investors who cared only about short-term returns, the culture that made the company successful could disappear within a year. Sophia explained that she was not trying to compete with the large venture firms already negotiating with the board. Instead she proposed forming a partnership that could quietly acquire a controlling share if the opportunity appeared during the upcoming negotiations. The advisors studied the numbers carefully. The transaction would be complex but not impossible. With the right financial backing and careful timing, the group could position itself as a serious alternative to the other investors currently approaching the company. Over the next several weeks the discussions intensified. Lawyers reviewed corporate documents. Financial analysts examined Aurora Dynamics' revenue projections and market position. Sophia continued her regular workdays at the office while spending her evenings reviewing contracts and learning more about the mechanics of major corporate acquisitions. None of her coworkers realized that the quiet strategist sitting among them during product meetings was also participating in negotiations that could soon determine who owned the entire company. Meanwhile, the board of Aurora Dynamics prepared for a decisive round of presentations from potential investors. Several powerful firms planned to submit final proposals within the next month. What the board members did not expect was that another investment group was preparing its own offer, one led by someone who understood the company in a way no outside firm ever could. As the summer sun rose over Chicago each morning, the gap between Sophia Bennett's past and the future she was preparing grew smaller. Soon the negotiations that would decide the fate of Aurora Dynamics would begin, and when they did, the woman who once listened quietly to customer support calls would walk into those discussions holding far more influence than anyone inside the company could possibly imagine. By late summer the skyline of Chicago shimmered under long golden evenings, and inside the upper floors of Aurora Dynamics the most important negotiations in the company's history were finally beginning. The board of directors had scheduled a series of formal presentations where competing investment groups would present their proposals for acquiring a major share of the company. Each firm arrived with polished financial forecasts, confident representatives, and promises of rapid national expansion. For most employees in the building, these meetings were distant rumors discussed quietly in hallways or during lunch breaks. But for the executives gathered in the boardroom, the decisions made during those days would shape the future of the entire company. Sophia Bennett moved through her workdays with the same calm focus she had always shown, reviewing product updates, answering questions from engineering teams, and attending strategy meetings where no one suspected that she was involved in negotiations happening only a few floors above. In the evenings, however, the pace of her life accelerated. Conference calls with financial advisors stretched late into the night, as the investment group she had assembled finalized the details of their proposal. Lawyers reviewed contracts line by line, while analysts adjusted projections to reflect the company's latest performance data. The plan was precise and carefully timed. Aurora Dynamics was valuable but vulnerable at this exact moment, and the board was searching for a partner who truly understood the company's long-term vision. Sophia's group intended to present exactly that. One afternoon, the boardroom doors closed for another round of investor presentations. Representatives from two large venture firms delivered confident speeches about scaling the company quickly across multiple markets. Their plans promised impressive short-term growth, but several board members remained cautious, asking questions about how the company's culture and customer focus would survive such rapid expansion. When the final presentation of the day began, the atmosphere shifted slightly. Instead of a large team of corporate executives, only a small group of advisors entered the room, accompanied by a lead representative who introduced the proposal calmly and without dramatic promises. The presentation focused on sustainable growth, customer retention, and long-term product stability. Charts appeared across the screen showing how Aurora Dynamics could expand while maintaining the internal systems that had allowed it to succeed so far. The board members studied the proposal carefully. The numbers were competitive with the larger firms, but what surprised them most was the depth of insight into the company's internal operations. Whoever had designed this strategy clearly understood Aurora Dynamics from the inside. Questions followed, and the advisors answered each one with quiet confidence, explaining that the investment group was led by someone who had spent years observing how the company truly functioned. The identity of that leader, however, would not be revealed until the final stage of negotiations. Over the next several days, the board reviewed every proposal in detail. As the discussions continued, one fact became increasingly clear. The most balanced and thoughtful plan for the company's future was the one submitted by the mysterious group, whose leader had not yet appeared in person. Inside Aurora Dynamics, the employees continued their normal routines, unaware that the decision about who would ultimately control the company was drawing closer with each passing hour. Sophia Bennett remained at her desk on the lower floor reviewing product data like any other day, but the quiet determination in her mind had never been stronger. Soon the board would request a final meeting with the leader of the investment group, whose proposal had impressed them the most. And when that meeting happened, the executives of Aurora Dynamics would finally discover that the person prepared to guide the company into its next chapter was someone they had already seen walking through the office halls every single day. The final week of negotiations arrived with the quiet intensity of a moment everyone sensed but few could fully see. Early Monday morning, the executive floor of Aurora Dynamics looked more formal than usual. Assistants moved quickly between offices carrying documents, and the boardroom lights were already glowing even before most employees arrived. News had spread among the directors that one investment proposal had clearly risen above the others. It was balanced, strategic, and unusually precise in its understanding of how the company operated. What remained unknown was the identity of the person leading the group behind that proposal. Late that morning, the board scheduled the final meeting. The leader of the investment group would present the closing terms in person. Outside the building, the city moved through a bright late summer day, while taxis rolled past the glass towers and the lake reflected the clear blue sky. Inside Aurora Dynamics, the atmosphere felt quieter, almost expectant. Sophia Bennett arrived at work that morning as she always did, carrying a simple notebook and a cup of black coffee. Her desk still sat among the same rows of employees who had watched her grow from a support specialist into someone whose insights shaped product strategy. Most of them greeted her with friendly nods, unaware that the day ahead would change the structure of the entire company. Shortly before noon, Sophia stood, closed her laptop, and walked toward the elevators. Instead of pressing the familiar button for her usual floor, she selected the executive level where the boardroom overlooked Lake Michigan. The elevator rose slowly, each floor passing with a soft mechanical hum. When the doors opened, she stepped into a quiet hallway lined with glass offices and polished wood panels. At the far end, the boardroom doors were already closed as directors reviewed the final documents of the meeting. An assistant approached and asked politely if she was there for the scheduled presentation. Sophia answered calmly and handed over a simple identification folder. The assistant glanced at the name inside, paused for a brief moment, and then opened the door. Inside the boardroom, the directors looked up from their papers as Sophia Bennett walked to the front of the table. Several of them recognized her immediately from previous strategy meetings, but confusion crossed their faces as they realized why she had arrived. One of the senior board members leaned forward slightly and asked the question everyone in the room was thinking. Sophia placed a thin folder on the table and met their gaze with quiet confidence. She explained that the investment proposal they had been studying for the past week had been organized and led by her partnership group. The room fell completely silent. Charts and documents that had seemed abstract only minutes earlier suddenly carried an entirely different meaning. Sophia calmly reviewed the proposal again, outlining how the investment group had secured the capital required to purchase a controlling share while preserving the company's long-term vision. Every figure, every projection, every strategic step had been carefully prepared over months of planning. As the presentation continued, the surprise among the board members gradually shifted into focused attention. They began asking detailed questions about financing structures, governance agreements, and long-term leadership plans. Sophia answered each one with the same steady clarity she once used when explaining technical problems to frustrated customers on support calls. By the time the meeting ended, the directors understood something that few people inside the company had ever realized. The person best prepared to guide Aurora Dynamics into its next chapter had been working quietly within the company all along, learning every part of its system while others searched for solutions from the outside. The boardroom remained quiet for several long moments after Sophia Bennett finished presenting the final details of the investment proposal. Through the wide glass windows, Lake Michigan stretched into the distance under the late afternoon sun, but inside the room every director was focused on the woman standing calmly at the head of the table. Many of them had seen her in earlier meetings, usually seated quietly near the side of the room, offering thoughtful insights about customer behavior or product performance. None of them had imagined that she had been preparing something this significant behind the scenes. One of the senior directors slowly closed the folder in front of him and leaned back in his chair as he studied the documents again. The proposal was clear, well-structured, and fully financed. If accepted, Sophia's investment partnership would acquire a controlling share of Aurora Dynamics while preserving the existing leadership structure and allowing the company to continue growing at a sustainable pace. The board members began discussing the details more openly now, asking questions about governance, voting rights, and long-term strategic planning. Sophia answered each question carefully, explaining how the structure of the partnership had been designed to protect the company's culture, while still providing the capital necessary for national expansion. What impressed the directors most was not simply the financial strength behind the offer, but the depth of understanding guiding it. Sophia spoke about Aurora Dynamics not as an abstract business opportunity, but as a system she had studied from the inside for years. She described the importance of maintaining the support teams that listened directly to customers and the engineering teams that responded quickly to real-world feedback. Her vision for the company's future sounded less like a takeover and more like a continuation of the principles that had already made the company successful. When the final questions were finished, the directors asked Sophia to step outside while they reviewed the proposal privately. She walked quietly into the hallway and sat near the large window overlooking the lake. The late afternoon sunlight reflected across the water in slow shimmering waves, while employees moved through the office behind the glass walls of nearby conference rooms. For a moment she simply watched the city below, remembering the first months after her divorce when she had walked these same streets wondering what direction her life would take. Nearly an hour later, the boardroom door opened again. A senior director stepped into the hallway and invited her back inside. When Sophia returned to the table, the atmosphere had shifted from surprise to quiet respect. The chairman of the board spoke first. After reviewing all competing offers and discussing the long-term direction of the company, the board had reached a decision. They believed the investment proposal led by Sophia Bennett represented the most balanced and responsible path forward for Aurora Dynamics. With that decision, the process of transferring majority ownership would begin immediately once the final legal agreements were completed. The announcement settled over the room with calm finality. The woman who had once worked quietly among the support desks was now preparing to become the majority owner of the entire company. As the meeting concluded, several directors approached her to shake her hand, acknowledging the determination and foresight that had brought her to this moment. Yet even as the room slowly emptied, Sophia remained the same composed presence she had always been. For her, the achievement was not about proving anyone wrong. It was about protecting the future of the company she had come to understand more deeply than anyone else. The official announcement was scheduled for the following Monday morning, and by the time the sun rose over Chicago that day, the entire executive floor of Aurora Dynamics felt different. Employees arriving for work noticed the unusual activity immediately. Assistants moved quickly between offices, conference rooms were fully booked, and a company-wide meeting had been placed on every employee's calendar. Rumors began circulating through the building before most people had even poured their first cup of coffee. Some believed a major investor had purchased the company. Others guessed that leadership changes were coming. Very few people imagined how surprising the truth would be. Shortly before 10 o'clock, employees gathered in the large presentation hall on the lower floor where company announcements were usually held. The room slowly filled with engineers, analysts, support staff, and managers who had all helped build Aurora Dynamics during its years of rapid growth. Among them were many of the same support specialists who still worked near the desks where Sophia Bennett had once spent her days answering customer calls. When the lights dimmed and the screen at the front of the room lit up, the chairman of the board stepped onto the stage. He spoke calmly about the company's journey so far, about the importance of listening to customers and adapting to change, and about the new opportunities ahead as Aurora Dynamics prepared to expand into larger markets across the country. Then he explained that after reviewing several major investment proposals, the board had selected a partner whose vision aligned perfectly with the company's values. The audience listened closely as he described how this new ownership structure would strengthen the company while preserving the culture that had made it successful. Finally, he paused and invited the leader of the investment partnership to join him on stage. A quiet murmur moved through the crowd as a familiar figure stepped forward from the side of the room. Sophia Bennett walked calmly toward the stage, her posture steady, her expression composed. For a moment, the audience simply stared in confusion. Many employees recognized her immediately, but could not understand why she had been invited to stand beside the chairman during such an important announcement. When the chairman introduced her as the majority owner of Aurora Dynamics, the room fell completely silent. The revelation moved through the crowd slowly as people began connecting the pieces of the story they had never seen before. The woman who had once worked among them in customer support had quietly built the investment partnership that now held controlling ownership of the company. Sophia stood beside the chairman and addressed the employees in a calm, steady voice. She spoke about the lessons she had learned from listening directly to customers, about the importance of teamwork, and about her commitment to protecting the culture that had helped the company grow. She did not speak about ambition or personal success. Instead, she spoke about responsibility and the future they would build together. As the announcement ended, the room filled with a mixture of surprise, admiration, and growing excitement. The story of Aurora Dynamics had just taken an unexpected turn, and the person guiding the company forward was someone who understood every part of it from the inside out. Yet for Sophia Bennett, the moment felt less like a triumph, and more like the natural continuation of a journey that had begun quietly years earlier, when she decided that understanding the system around her was more powerful than trying to prove anyone wrong. The days following the announcement moved quickly across Aurora Dynamics like the first breeze after a long still afternoon. Employees who had once walked past Sophia Bennett's desk without a second thought now greeted her with a mixture of curiosity and quiet respect. Yet inside the company, very little changed in the way she carried herself. She still arrived early in the morning while the city outside was just beginning to wake, the soft glow of sunrise reflecting across the glass buildings of downtown Chicago. From the windows of the executive floor, Lake Michigan stretched wide and calm, the same view she had once seen only when attending occasional strategy meetings. Now the office overlooking that view belonged to her, but the feeling inside remained familiar. Work continued as it always had. Engineers presented updates on new product features. Analysts reviewed performance reports showing how customer satisfaction had steadily improved over the past year. Support teams answered calls from people across the country who relied on Aurora Dynamics' platform every day. Sophia moved through these meetings with the same quiet focus she had shown from the beginning, listening carefully and asking thoughtful questions that helped the teams refine their ideas. Her leadership style surprised many executives who expected dramatic changes after the transition in ownership. Instead of rushing toward aggressive expansion, she focused first on strengthening the systems that already worked. She approved investments in customer support technology, encouraged engineers to continue studying real user feedback, and reminded every department that the company's greatest strength had always been its ability to listen. One afternoon, as she stood near the wide window of her office watching the sunlight ripple across the lake, she reflected on how far the journey had taken her. Years earlier she had stood in a crowded ballroom, while someone she once trusted laughed at the idea that answering customer calls could ever become a real career. At the time she had said nothing. Silence had been easier than explaining the quiet determination already growing in her mind. She had simply returned to work the next day and begun paying closer attention to the systems around her. That decision, repeated over months and years, had gradually shaped a path no one else could see. Outside the office, the city continued moving through its endless rhythm of traffic lights, train horns, and conversations drifting through busy streets. Somewhere within that enormous city lived people who still believed success required loud ambition or public recognition. Sophia Bennett understood something different now. Real change often began quietly, in moments when no one else was paying attention. It began with patience, with curiosity, and with the decision to understand a system deeply enough to guide it toward something better. Late that evening, as the last employees left the building and the city lights began glowing across the dark surface of the lake, Sophia turned off the lights in her office and prepared to leave for the night. Aurora Dynamics was no longer simply the company where she had once worked. It was the future she had chosen to protect and build. And somewhere in the quiet distance of memory there was a voice that once doubted her path, a voice that had laughed at a small job answering phones. That voice no longer mattered. The answer had never needed words. It had only needed time.